The winter storms of the high Rockies didn't just arrive. They descended, heavy, merciless, like a living thing that wanted inside your bones. In the Wind River Valley of the 1830s, cold wasn't a season. It was a predator. And in late November of 1834, it found its favorite victim, the cabin of a young mountain man named Jonas Fletcher. At 8,000 feet, sound travels strangely. Snow muffles everything except the wind, and that night, the wind screamed like something ancient and angry. Jonas sat beside a blazing fire, or what should have been a blazing fire, and watched frost form on the inside of his cabin walls. Inside, the walls themselves glittered with ice, each log a bridge carrying his precious heat straight out into the night. This wasn't cold. This was punishment. The fire roared with the hunger of a thing losing a fight. Jonas fed it constantly, shoving in log after log, burning through his winter supply like a man bailing water from a sinking ship. He had built this cabin with pride, followed every rule other trappers told him. Tight logs, thick walls, north wall fireplace, plenty of chinking. The normal way, the proven way. But that winter revealed the truth. The standard frontier cabin wasn't designed for the mountains, it was designed for death. What Jonas discovered next became the frontier heating trick that kept mountain cabins warm at 30 degrees. The cold seeped through every mistake he made. He'd cut his logs late in summer, when the sap still ran in them. As they dried, they shrank and twisted, opening thin gaps you could almost slip a knife blade through. His chinking, clay and moss, had hardened, cracked, and then crumbled in the earliest freeze. The bark he left on the logs held moisture like a sponge, inviting rot and insects. It froze into tiny channels that funneled cold air inward. Log by mistake, he had built his own enemy. But the worst truth revealed itself at dawn. Jonas leaned forward, trying to warm his hands. His beard bristled with frost. His breath drifted like smoke. The fire was still burning, but the room wasn't warming, because the heat was going the wrong direction. Every stone in his fireplace was locked against the north wall, radiating half its warmth outward into the frozen darkness. His logs conducted heat outward faster than the fire could replace it. The roof gaps he hadn't noticed now breathed heat upward like an open throat. This was frontier winter hardship in its purest form, the kind that kills quietly. And when the sun finally rose, his water bucket, 3 feet from the flames, was frozen solid. It didn't matter that he followed every rule. The rules were wrong. By February, Jonas was burning wood at a rate no mountain man should face. 4 cords a month, splitting logs until his palms bled raw, his back ached from hauling. His nights were sleepless. His breath frosted the cabin's interior planks like silver lace. He wasn't a weak man. He wasn't inexperienced with hardship. But the cabin he trusted had betrayed him. A silent enemy that made every hour a battle. Out here, wilderness survival history wasn't about heroics. It was about understanding how heat moved, how cold hunted you, how the land punished mistakes. Frontier survival skills weren't optional. They were the difference between waking up and being found frozen. Jonas didn't know it yet, but he was facing an invisible, ruthless truth. The mountains don't care how hard you work. They care how smart you build. And this cabin, his proud first creation, was a machine built for suffering, but not for long. Because survival has a way of sharpening the mind. And in the coming seasons, what Jonas would discover, through pain, through failure, and through the mentorship of 2 unlikely teachers, would evolve into a form of survival engineering so effective that modern cabin builders still struggle to match it. But that revelation would come later. For now, Jonas sat staring into a fire that could no longer protect him. A young trapper, learning the harshest lesson the old mountains had to offer. If you build wrong, you suffer. If you build right, you survive. And Jonas Fletcher was done suffering. By the time the first winter ended, Jonas understood something every mountain man eventually learned. A bad cabin is worse than no cabin at all. Outside, the world was frozen in silence. Inside, his walls dripped with frost. And the very structure meant to protect him had become a trap. Most trappers believed cabins failed because the mountains were unforgiving, storms too fierce, temperatures too low, winds too brutal. But Jonas would learn the truth the hard way. Cabins didn't fail because nature was cruel. Cabins failed because their builders misunderstood nature. Let's break this down through the eyes of a man freezing inside his own creation. The logs shrank, and the gaps grew like wounds. Jonas had cut his logs late in the summer, when the sap still ran wet beneath the bark. The logs looked solid when stacked, a tight wall of rounded pine and fir. But as they dried, after the cabin was built, each one shrank by fractions of an inch. Those fractions added up to dozens of needle-thin cracks, invisible at first, but wide enough to channel cold air straight inside. The walls weren't walls at all. They were sieves. The chinking cracked and died in the first freeze. Jonas used what every beginner used: clay, moss, grass shoved into the gaps. It worked for a few warm days, until the first freeze hit. Clay hardened, cracked, and then crumbled. Moss dried, shrank, and fell out. Grass withered, turned brittle, and blew away. In the middle of a Wyoming winter, Jonas was basically living inside a very expensive pile of firewood. But the worst mistake was invisible and deadly. The fireplace was in the wrong place, catastrophically wrong. Jonas placed his fireplace on the north wall because the ground was flattest there. Logical, convenient, and absolutely fatal. A fireplace isn't a convenience. It is the heart of a frontier survival system. By putting it on an exterior wall, Jonas unknowingly did this. Radiated half of his heat outward, heated the forest instead of his floor, lost thermal mass to the open air, created cold zones behind him while he worked. Modern builders still make this mistake. Frontier winter hardships weren't caused by a lack of strength. They were caused by poor design. The pioneers who survived longest understood that a fireplace must sit inside the insulated envelope, not pressed against the outside like an afterthought. The roof leaked heat like an open wound. Jonas thought his roof was tight. But the mountains don't care what you think. They show you the truth. Warm air rises naturally, one of the most ancient principles of wilderness survival history. And Jonas's roofline wasn't sealed properly. Every minute, heat escaped upward like smoke. Every hour, the temperature inside his cabin dropped. Every night, the cold fought its way right back in. He didn't know it yet, but he was fighting three enemies: conduction, convection, radiation, the three ways heat moves, and the three things his cabin was losing the battle against. The floor was a frozen slab of earth. Every trapper did it this way: pack down the dirt and call it good. But that's not good. That's a direct thermal bridge to the frozen ground, a siphon sucking warmth from every square inch of the cabin. Jonas often felt the cold through his boots, creeping upward through the soles, numbing his legs as he slept. Cold rises too, from the earth below. Frontier survival skills required more than swinging an axe. They required understanding the land like an adversary. Jonas was trapped in a structure designed to betray him. By February, Jonas burned wood at a rate that shocked even old trappers: 4 cords per month. The forest thinned around his cabin like a ring of defeat. Every day he split more logs. Every night he fed a fire that could not be won. He wasn't weak. He wasn't ignorant. He simply built like everyone else. And everyone else built wrong. Then came the moment that changed everything, when a passing trapper told him a truth that shattered everything he thought he knew. One crisp morning in late winter, a Swedish trapper named Niels Bergstrom stopped at his door. Niels had the quiet confidence of a man who'd outlived storms Jonas couldn't imagine. He stepped inside, looked once at the frost on the walls, and said, "In my country, your cabin is built backwards, backwards. Not flawed, not sloppy, backwards." He pressed his palm to the icy log wall and nodded to the fireplace. "You have made the fire warm the outside," he said, "and the cold lives in your walls." Jonas stared at him, stunned, exhausted, and half frozen. "But I did everything right." Neil shook his head. "No, you did what others told you, Now learn what the mountains tell you. That was the moment the old knowledge began to wake. Knowledge that would turn Jonas into one of the greatest survival engineers the Rockies would ever quietly produce. And it began with a simple truth. Heat must live inside the house. Cold must stay where it belongs. And a cabin must choose a side. The morning Niels Bergstrom stepped into Jonas's miserable cabin, something changed. Not in the temperature out that was still freezing, but in Jonas's understanding. He expected Niels to tell him to cut more wood, patch more gaps, toughen up. Instead, the old trapper walked around the cabin with the quiet precision of a doctor diagnosing a dying patient. He pressed his palm to the frosted interior logs. He crouched near the floor, feeling the draft. He stood beside the fireplace, eyes narrowing at the stones. Then he said something Jonas would remember for the rest of his life. In my country, fire sits inside the house, not on its edge. And for the first time, Jonas realized the frontier had secrets older than the frontier itself. Niels explained in simple frontier English terms. You build fire to warm the outside forest. You let the cold live inside your walls. This is backwards. He knelt beside the fireplace and tapped the stones. These stones get hot, but they warm the night sky, not the room. In Scandinavia, Niels explained, log homes didn't just use stone for cooking. They used massive stone inside the structure to store heat. Back home, winter is long and dark. Fire is not only flame, fire is memory. You make heat that lasts after the flame dies. Heat that lasts. This was survival engineering centuries old, the kind Jonas had never heard, the kind modern cabins still overlook. Niels continued, you do not make constant fire, you make smart fire. A heavy stone mass, placed centrally, surrounded by insulated walls. It becomes a thermal battery, storing heat like a frontier bank account deposits warmth you can withdraw overnight. If Jonas's cabin was a bucket with holes, Swedish fire logic was the art of patching every leak before you fill the bucket. But Jonas still lacked half the knowledge he needed until she arrived. Later that autumn, when the frost returned too early, a French-Canadian trapper named Baptiste Marot stopped by Jonas's place with his wife, a Shoshone woman named Morning Crow. She stepped inside the cabin, looked at the walls once, and said, in a blend of Shoshone, French, and frontier English, white men build cold houses. Jonas nearly snapped. He'd heard enough mockery, enough pity, enough reminders that he slept colder than wolves outside. But Morning Crow wasn't mocking. She was diagnosing. She tapped the walls with the back of her knuckles. One skin, another tap. Cold comes in, warmth goes out. Then she held up two fingers. Our lodges have two skins, one outside, one inside. Between them, air sleeps. Air sleeps. Not air moves, not air escapes, but air sleeps. Trapped, still, motionless. And still air is insulation. This was Shoshone brilliance, a 1,000-year-old system frontier settlers rarely understood. Morning Crow explained, air is clever. If it moves, it steals. Warmth. If it sleeps, it protects. Two walls, a space between. Layers of organic insulation. Moss, leaves, dry grasses. Trapped, unmoving air. This wasn't technology. This was observation, refined over generations of surviving winters long before Europeans ever saw these mountains. Jonas listened, humbled. Niels had taught him how heat works. Morning Crow taught him how cold works. Together, their lessons revealed the frontier's deepest engineering principle, a rule modern builders often forget. Warmth is not created. Warmth is preserved. Swedish knowledge. Store heat. Shoshone knowledge. Don't let it escape. That simple combination, thermal mass plus trapped air, became the blueprint for the greatest cabin Jonas would ever build. Every handful of moss was worth an hour of winter comfort. As the couple left, Morning Crow paused at the door. You fix this, she said, gesturing at the cabin. Or winter will fix you. Jonas didn't sleep that night. He lay awake beside a fire that barely warmed his blanket, thinking not about what he'd done wrong, but about what he could do right. He needed seasoned logs, double walls, proper chinking air that sleeps, a raised floor, a sealed roof, and above all, a stone heart of fire placed in the center of the cabin where the cold couldn't steal it. This wasn't building a shelter, this was building survival itself. And when the thaw came, Jonas stepped outside with an axe on his shoulder and a stubborn determination burning hotter than any fire he'd lit that winter. He was ready to build again, but this time, he wasn't building like a beginner. He was building like a man who had finally been taught the truth. When the snow finally melted and the Wind River Valley pulled itself out of winter's grip, Jonas Fletcher stood over the ruins of his first attempt at a home. He didn't tear it down in anger, he didn't curse it. He simply looked at it with the quiet resolve of a man who had suffered enough and learned more than he ever expected. If his first cabin was built with muscle and eagerness, the second would be built with intelligence, the kind that only cold, suffering, and good teachers can forge. The mountains gave him one chance to get it right. Jonas started early, late fall of 1835, long before building season. Niels had explained that good cabins started the same place as good bread, with proper preparation. So Jonas selected pine and fir trees when the sap had retreated deep into the trunk. No wet logs, no shrinking walls, no slow-motion collapse. This time, every cut was deliberate. He felled twice as many trees as needed because he wasn't building a single-walled trap. He was building a structure with double walls, layered insulation, and air pockets that would sleep, just as Morning Crow described. He debarked every log, a brutal task with a draw knife, but necessary. No bark, no moisture traps, no rot, no insects burrowing highways straight into the living space. This was not frontier enthusiasm. This was frontier engineering. Jonas split and stacked the logs on raised rails, spacing each layer so wind could pass through. They sat all winter, drying, curing, shrinking before they ever touched the cabin frame. Modern cabin builders still skip this step, and they pay the price in drafts, gaps, and endless repairs. Jonas knew better now. He checked them weekly, running his hand across the grain, feeling the dryness settle in. Each log became a piece of a larger machine, a survival structure. He wasn't building walls, he was building a weapon against cold. Jonas dug deep, packing river stones into corner pads to lift the cabin a full 2 feet off the ground. Why? Because the earth is a thief. It steals heat at night, steals cool air in summer, steals comfort year-round. Most frontier cabins sat directly on dirt floors, their heat draining straight into the frozen soil. But raised cabins, real survival cabins, float above that danger like ships on water. He laid thick beams across the stone pads. On top of those, he placed split puncheon floorboards, flat, smooth, seasoned, creating the warmest floor he had ever stood on. This wasn't a cabin anymore. This was strategy. Morning Crow's lesson shaped everything he built next. He built the main log walls with hewn flat contact surfaces. Each log rested tight as puzzle pieces, locked together in a way that made drafts unthinkable. Then he built a second internal wall on the north and west sides, the battlefront walls. Between those two walls, moss dried perfectly, leaves crushed but intact, grasses layered in mats, clay dust, sprinkled to block insects, and the most important ingredient of all, still air that slept, just as she told him. This was insulation before the word existed out here. This was survival knowledge passed through generations of people who had lived in these mountains long before he arrived. Jonas didn't just respect that knowledge, he relied on it. Jonas no longer stuffed random material into the gaps. He made a mixture he learned from trappers and settlers: clay, sand cow hair, and a little lime. The hair bound the mixture, the sand strengthened it, the clay sealed it, and the lime hardened it against water and frost. It adhered so well that it would stay intact for decades. His chinking wasn't a filler. It was armor. Instead of a shallow roof like basic cabins, Jonas built a steep pitch. the kind that defied heavy snow loads and shed water easily. On top of the wood shingles, he added a clay moisture barrier, a thick layer of grass-rich soil, a grid of wooden frames to hold it all in. Within weeks, wildflowers sprouted above his head, and grasses rooted deep into the soil. This wasn't decoration, it was insulation. It was thermal mass, it was a living roof, a frontier cooling and heating system in one. The sod absorbed summer sunlight, keeping the interior cool, and in winter it trapped warmth, like a thick wool blanket, across the entire structure. Every decision meant survival. Jonas built, logs selected at the right season, a raised foundation, double walls, trapped air insulation, reinforced chinking, a heavy sod roof, and soon, the heart of it all, a massive stone fireplace placed deep inside the living space. He worked 12 hours a day through the summer of 1836. Sweat ran down his back. Splinters tore into his hands. Mosquitoes bit his neck until it bled. But he didn't stop, because he finally understood the truth. The mountains had been screaming since his first winter. You don't survive the frontier by building fast. You survive by building right. And as the summer sun sank behind the peaks each evening, Jonas stood in the half-finished cabin and imagined the coming winter, and for the first time, he didn't feel fear. He felt ready. By late summer of 1836, Jonas had built walls that trapped air like a sleeping animal, a roof that breathed with the seasons, and a foundation lifted high above the cold, hungry earth. But all of that meant nothing without heat that stayed, not heat that flickered, not heat that escaped, heat that endured. In the Rockies, fire wasn't warmth. Fire was time, borrowed hours of safety before the cold came hunting again. And Jonas knew the frontier had one final test for him. Build a fire system that could outlast the dark. This was no fireplace. This was survival genius hidden inside a wall of stone. Most mountain men built fireplaces the same way. Fast, crude, thin-walled against an exterior wall. It worked fine in the east. But the Rockies were not the east. When the temperature outside dropped to 30 below, thin stone bled heat outward. Rising smoke pulled warmth up the chimney. Large gaps let in drafts, and exterior wall placement wasted half the fire's energy. Jonas had lived inside that failure. He had felt it on his skin, inside his lungs, under his bones. Nothing in the world teaches you engineering faster than fear of freezing. Niels Bergstrom's words echoed constantly as Jonas gathered stones from the river. Heat must live inside the house. Stone remembers the fire. Shape the mass, and it will shape the winter. In Scandinavia, settlers didn't build fireplaces. They built heat batteries. Thick, heavy, slow, to warm, slow to cool. Once heated, they glowed with soft warmth through the night, even after the flames died. Frontier survival skills were not about muscle. They were about understanding the deep, ancient logic of heat. Jonas spent almost 2 weeks hauling stone, flat river stones for the firebox floor, rounder stones for the upper body, dense slabs for the hearth. The structure rose slowly, layer by layer, solid, massive, deliberate. He built it 4 feet away from the north wall, entirely surrounded by his insulated interior space. This one decision alone changed his survival odds forever. And then he built it outward, far beyond what any trapper considered normal. The firebox was modest, but the thermal mass around it? 5 tons of stone, a fortress of heat. 2 bench-like wings extended from the fireplace, stone seats that doubled as thermal reservoirs. You could sit on them in winter, warm as a quilt. At night, they glowed with residual heat like gentle, sleeping animals. People later joked Jonas didn't build a cabin. He built a miniature sun. At Neil's suggestion, Jonas built a chimney with a slight bend, about 5 feet above the firebox. Not enough to choke the smoke, just enough to force it to brush against more stone surface before rising. This extracted even more heat. Then he added a stone damper, a frontier trick few young trappers knew. With it, he could slow the upward pull of warm air, keeping precious heat inside the cabin. The first time Jonas lit a fire in the partially finished structure. Something happened he had never felt before. After an hour, the stones grew warm. After 2 hours, they radiated steady heat. By sunset, the cabin felt like it had a living heartbeat. The heat didn't just sit in the room. It soaked into the stones, stored there like a precious resource. When Jonas let the flames die to coals, the cabin didn't cool. The heat stayed. Hours passed. The stones kept breathing warmth. This was frontier survival engineering at its purest. Use nature's physics to beat nature itself. His structure was no longer a pile of logs. It had become a system. Raised floor kept earth cold below. Double walls kept winter winds out. Sleeping air pockets kept heat from escaping. Sod roof kept summer heat out, and winter warmth in central stone mass stored fire. Together, these turned the cabin into a climate engine, a full survival machine that worked with seasons, not against them. But the true test wasn't firelight. It was darkness. A blizzard, a night without flame. That trial was coming. And Jonas intended to face it with calm confidence for the first time in his life. Because he had not merely built a fireplace. He had built heart, a stone heart, a warm heart, a heart that, once awakened, would beat through the coldest night the mountains could deliver. Winter returned to the Wind River Valley carrying a different tone. Not the casual cold of early frost, not the quiet chill of November nights, but the heavy stalking presence of a blizzard that had already broken 2 other cabins in the valley. Trappers whispered about it at the fall rendezvous. Colder than 34, one said. Comes howling, another warned. Test every man's roof and resolve. Old-timers simply nodded. Storms like this weren't weather events. They were hunters, and that winter the hunter came for Jonas. But it wasn't the same man, or the same cabin. It came for last time. The storm hit with no warning. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in a single day. Clouds rolled down the mountain slopes like dark avalanches. Jonas stood inside his new cabin, waiting, listening, feeling. He'd lived this fear before. The numb fingers, the frost creeping across the walls, the fire that could never keep up. But this time, the fear never found him. Instead, the stones behind him radiated warmth, a calm glow, steady, patient. The cabin held its breath, like a great wooden animal prepared for battle. Jonas did something unthinkable to most trappers. He let the fire go out. Not because he wanted to, because he needed to know. The cabin wasn't proven by the blaze. It was proven by the dark, by the emptiness between midnight and dawn, by the moment the cold hunted hardest. He banked the coals, closed the stone damper halfway, stepped back, and waited. The blizzard howled outside like madness incarnate. Snow piled against the double walls, their insulated cores swallowing the sound. Wind hammered the sod roof, but the living earth above him absorbed the impact like a thick blanket. The floor stayed warm under his boots, no frozen ground stealing heat anymore. The temperature inside dropped. Of course it dropped, but slowly, so slowly. Measured not in minutes, not in hours, but in heartbeats. Around midnight, Jonas placed a hand on the stone wing beside the firebox. It was warm, not hot, not blazing, but warm, like a living body, warm, like stored sunlight. Outside, the wind hit 40 miles an hour. Inside, the candle flame didn't even flicker. No drafts, no ice on the walls, no fear. For the first time since he came to the mountains, Jonas slept a full night in winter without waking to feed the flames. This wasn't comfort. This was victory. A victory earned through survival engineering, frontier survival skills, and the hard-earned lessons of 2 cultures, the Swedish logic of heat storage and the Shoshone mastery of insulated living. When Jonas woke, he checked the temperature by instinct, a habit born of trauma more than curiosity. No frost on the walls, none. He stepped outside, opened the door into the teeth of the storm's dying breath, and watched gusts of snow swirl past his boots. The exterior logs were white with ice. The interior logs were dry. His cabin was doing what cabins were meant to do, holding warmth like a fortress. Other trappers soon noticed something strange. Jonas burned half the wood everyone else did. By January, word spread through the valley. Ain't right how warm his place stays. Storm didn't touch him. Barely cuts wood anymore. Got some kind of Shoshone witchcraft in those walls. No. Swedish stone magic, I heard. Doesn't matter what it is, it works. Trappers visited. They stepped inside, frost melting off their coats. They ran hands over the smooth stones. They squatted near the floor and felt no drafts. They examined the roof and marveled at the sod's performance. And every man asked the same question. How'd you do it? Jonas didn't say much. He never bragged, never claimed he invented anything. He simply pointed to the double walls, the sleeping air insulation, the raised floor, the sod roof, the stone heart. This is how you live in the mountains, he said. Anything less, and the winter will take you. In that valley, in that storm, in that year, a truth crystallized. The cold wasn't unbeatable. It was simply smarter than most men. But Jonas had finally outsmarted it. A young trapper who once spent nights shivering beside a fire that died too fast, now stood inside a cabin where warmth lingered long after the flames collapsed to ash. And the mountains, for once, offered respect. Jonas didn't smile. Frontier men weren't built that way. But he breathed deeply, a long, slow breath filled with something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Because the cold had come hunting again, and this time, it walked away empty-handed. Once word spread that Jonas Fletcher's cabin had beaten the blizzard, not endured it, not survived it, but defeated it, trappers began appearing at his door with the same expression, a mix of pride and embarrassment. Mountain men prided themselves on independence, but when the cold tried to kill you every winter, and someone else found a better way to fight back, pride bent its knee. Jonas didn't lecture. He didn't boast. He simply opened his door, stepped aside, and let them see. Every man who entered walked out changed. Frontier knowledge never spread through books. It spread through campsite stories, trail conversations, winter shelters shared by strangers, rendezvous gatherings, and long, quiet nights where survival sat at the center of every discussion. Jonas didn't invent the techniques, but he combined them in a way few mountain men had seen, and that combination became wildfire. Within a year, 3 cabins in the Wind River Valley had adopted his methods. Within 2 years, a dozen more across nearby ranges. And within 5 years, the techniques had traveled into Montana Territory, Idaho, the Tetons, and even Oregon-bound wagon trains. The frontier didn't have newspapers, it had results. 2 brothers from Kentucky visited Jonas during a late autumn supply run. They planned to build a small homestead for winter trapping. After stepping into Jonas's cabin, warm, draft-free, still comfortable even with the fire reduced to coals, they made their decision instantly. Build it dead center, Jonas told them, tapping the stone mass. Not against a wall, not wedged in a corner. Center. The brothers followed his advice with a stubborn fury. They constructed a stone tower so massive, it took a team of men 2 weeks to stack. When their first winter hit, the structure stayed warm for 24 hours after the fire went out. Their cabin became known as the Warm Box, and every traveler who rested there carried the story onward. A French-Canadian trapper named Remy admired Jonas's double wall design, but didn't have the labor to build it all the way around. So he compromised. Double walls on the north, single walls on the south, extra, chinking in the east, a sod roof like Jonas's. It worked, warm enough to save his life during a February freeze. And his idea, partial double walling, spread like dust on the winter wind. Trappers loved it because it saved time. Not all cabins needed full armor. Some just needed a shield on the side where winter struck hardest. At first, nobody trusted Jonas's sod roof. Grass on a roof? It'll leak. It'll fall. Looks wrong. But then a winter storm dropped 3 feet of snow across the valley. 3 cabins collapsed. One lost half its roof. Jonas's stood untouched. The sod roof absorbed heavy snow, slowed melt, insulated the interior, and protected the wooden shingles underneath. After that winter, sod roofs began appearing everywhere, on trappers' shelters, settlers' shacks, hunting cabins, and eventually ranch homes built near the valley. Some builders added clay layers, some added bark sheets under the sod, others planted wildflowers on top to keep the soil tight. The idea evolved like a living thing, just as knowledge does when it's shared freely. One of Jonas's quietest innovations spread the fastest: the high vents. He drilled two small holes near the roofline, one east, one west, to let hot air escape in summer and fresh air enter during warm months. In winter, he plugged them with fitted wood caps sealed with clay. This simple detail made his cabin feel cool and breezy in July, while others baked like ovens. Frontier survival stories often focus on winter hardships, but summer in the mountains could be brutal too. Hot days, trapped smoke, and stale air. Jonas's system solved all of that. Within a year, dozens of cabins copied it. Most people imagine the Wild West as a place of chaos, gunfights, saloons, desperados. But parallel to that world was another story: a quiet evolution of survival engineering, shaped by cold, sweat, collaboration, and ingenuity. Jonas never claimed to be a master builder. He simply refused to freeze again. And because he shared what he learned without hesitation, entire communities benefited. Homes got warmer. Families stayed healthier. Forests around settlements recovered because each improved cabin burned half the firewood. That was the hidden ripple effect: invisible, powerful, and lasting. Frontier knowledge didn't grow outward like a tree. It spread sideways like roots, quietly strengthening everything around it.
By the early 1840s, Jonas Fletcher's cabin stood in the Wind River Valley like a quiet contradiction, a simple log structure that outperformed many modern homes, built with tools, supplies, and precision he could never have imagined. Visitors often walked around it twice, confused. How's this old place warmer than my new build? Why does it stay cool when mine turns into an oven? What trick did he use? But there was no trick. Just principles modern builders often ignore. The truth wasn't that Jonas was ahead of his time, it's that we fell behind. Modern builders focus on aesthetics. Frontier builders focused on survival. Today, countless cabins and tiny homes are built for style, aesthetic, quick construction, profit. Rustic vibes. Frontier men didn't have that luxury. Every beam was a survival decision. Every angle had consequences. Every mistake drew blood, usually from frozen fingertips. Jonas's cabin wasn't pretty, but it was nearly perfect. Modern designs love fireplaces on outside walls because it looks symmetrical. It fits floor plans. It's traditional, but the tradition is wrong. A fireplace belongs inside the insulated envelope. Jonas understood instinctively what engineers now teach: a centrally positioned thermal mass. Stores more heat, radiates so evenly, reduces fuel needs, works with convection, prevents cold zones. His fireplace didn't decorate the room, it defined survival. A single wall in a cold climate is a betrayal. Modern cabins often use single stud walls, minimal insulation, thin sheathing, aesthetic interior paneling. All beautiful, all dangerous in wilderness survival terms. Jonas's double wall design, guided by Morning Crow's Shoshone wisdom, created the very thing modern builds lack: trapped, motionless air. Air that sleeps, air that becomes insulation, air that separates life from frost.
On the left, the single layer of logs faces the winter without help. Cold slips through the seams, frosting the grain and shaking the wall with every gust. On the right, Jonas's double wall design holds a cushion of moss and straw between two skins of wood. The outer wall bears the chill.
This technique was so effective that it remains in use today in passive home standards. Yet many builders still overlook it in rustic-style cabins. Many modern cabins sit directly on slabs, on cold piers with no insulation, on dirt-packed floors for authenticity, or poorly insulated crawl spaces. Jonas understood, through suffering, that the earth is a thermal thief. His raised floor, built on stone piers, insulated with heavy puncheons, created something magical. Warmth that stayed inside instead of sinking into the soil. Frontier survival engineering wasn't fancy. It was correct. Today, metal roofs dominate rural builds. They're durable, fast, and efficient, but often terrible for temperature stability. Jonas built something modern homes rarely replicate: a living roof, heavy sod, clay moisture barrier, grass roots binding the soil, natural insulation, incredible thermal mass, summer cooling, winter warmth retention. It looked primitive. It outperformed modern roofing in passive heating and cooling. A good roof isn't about shedding water. It's about shaping climate. Most builders worry about air conditioning, HVAC, electric fans, complex vents. Frontier builders like Jonas used nature, summer, open vents near roofline. Winter, seal those vents. Summer, purge hot air at dawn. Winter, keep warm air trapped. Modern homes trap heat when they shouldn't and lose heat when they desperately need it. Jonas solved both with 2 holes and 2 wooden plugs. Sometimes genius is so simple, we overlook it. Modern construction is a race, a business, a timeline, a checklist. Frontier construction was a negotiation with death. If Jonas built poorly, he froze. If he built well, he lived. Those stakes shaped every decision he made, and that's why modern cabins, filled with new materials, better tools, and endless technology, still get outperformed by a structure built by one man with an axe, a saw, a draw knife, and pure stubborn will. Jonas didn't set out to create a perfect design. He simply refused to repeat a mistake that nearly cost him his life. And in doing so, he rediscovered truths older than the frontier. Heat must be stored. Cold must be stopped. Buildings must breathe with the seasons. Survival is earned through design, not brute force. His cabin survived storms that flattened others. It kept families warm long after he left. It influenced mountain building for generations. And its principles, thermal mass, double walls, passive airflow, raised floors, remain cornerstones of modern passive home engineering. Not because Jonas was a genius, but because Jonas listened. To Niels, to Morning Crow, to the mountains themselves. The cabin that once welcomed him home has long since collapsed, but the wisdom inside its walls, the warmth stored in stone, the stillness held in air, outlived every log he laid. He wasn't ahead of his time. We're the ones who forgot the old ways.